Why is nobody talking about drugs, cheating on logs, and driver turnover? On today's episode of Driven Too Far, we're tackling these taboo trucking topics. Hello, I'm Andrew Winkler with Chief Carriers, and this is Driven Too Far, the truth about trucking, a podcast that helps over-the-road truck drivers balance career and family. Hey, today we're going to talk about some of the taboo topics in trucking. Why is nobody talking about these? Well, it's kind of the dark side of our industry. And to be honest with you, everybody just would prefer to stay away from it. But we're going to tackle it a little bit today. I think it's still important to talk about what's going on behind the scenes in our industry and stuff. And the first one I want to talk about is substance abuse. Unfortunately, it's an issue in the industry. What kind of substance abuse is out there? Well, the number one is, of course, marijuana. And 56% of the dirty drug screens out there come back positive for marijuana. 15% come back for cocaine, 10% for meth, and 9% for amphetamine. So those are the top four issues in our industry. Now, there's not a large portion of our drivers or our industry out there doing these kind of things, but nevertheless, we've had some issues with substance abuse in the industry. Sometimes I think the general public thinks we have a much larger problem than we actually do. One of the big changes is from the DEA, and they're changing marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 drug. What does that mean for trucking? Almost nothing. So they're not looking at legalizing it. It still needs to be prescription only. It's still considered a controlled substance in the industry. And the reality is it's probably not going to change on our industry until they figure out a way to test for impairment. So the struggle with marijuana, whether you're for it, against it, wherever you stand on that topic, is that if somebody has used the drug, there's not a great way to test a driver before he goes on duty to see if the effects of that drug are still in his system. And until they come out with some kind of test, I don't think you'll see any kind of marijuana legalized for the trucking industry. Back in January of 2020 is when the FMCSA changed, or they came up with the drug clearinghouse. So that really had an impact on our industry as well, as far as drivers that were using. It was pretty easy if a driver tested positive for something on a random, where they would be excused from that carrier, but they could go down the street and essentially get a job pretty quick before there was a way to know if they tested positive from previous employers or not. So it was kind of easy to get around that. When they came out with the drug clearinghouse in 2020, now every carrier, when you submit an application to a carrier for a job, the carrier has to go in and check the drug clearinghouse. They have to run your name, your social security number to see if there's any history of positive drug tests. What kind of impact did the clearinghouse have on our industry? Well, I've seen numbers as high as 220,000 drivers had been affected once that thing kicked in. And it happened to kick in right around the time COVID did too. So, between COVID and drug clearinghouse and things, we've had a lot of drivers leave the industry. Just how big of an impact has it had on our industry? We've seen numbers that say up to 75% of the drivers that have left because of a positive drug test have not come back to the industry. It's not so easy to get back either. They have to go through a process where they have to talk to a counselor. They have to go through so many drug screens that have to come back clean, obviously, before they can be admitted back or get their CDL back. So it's not an easy process. And I think what's happened essentially is a lot of them either they like their little habit on the side, or they found other work that was outside of trucking and they said, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm not going to go through these steps to get my CDL back. I'll just go find something else to do to make a living. One of the other topics we tend to shy away from in trucking it's some safety issues, and it's the idea of cheating on Elogs. Back in the day when we ran paper logs, if you've been a driver for some time, you knew it was pretty easy to cheat when you had paper logs. You may start your log for the day, and as long as you didn't have any stops along the way from law enforcement, you could simply crumple that thing up, throw it away, and start a new log, make it look how you wanted to, make it look perfect. Elogs was kind of a game changer for us, where it was a little bit harder to cheat, but it only took a matter of time before drivers kind of figured out how to game the system. Just how do drivers cheat on Elogs? Well, the latest data says that 11% of them deactivate the unit, or they simply unplug the unit. When that happens, your drive time will pop up an unassigned drive time. Now, in a large carrier with a bigger safety department, they probably have processes in place to check for this kind of thing daily. They're going to know almost right away if you deactivate or unplug a unit, because we get an alert behind the scenes. If you're a small carrier, they may not have the processes in place and safety to catch those kind of things, or some small carriers are actually okay with it. You know, when you think of a smaller carrier that's maybe running a handful of trucks and they're pushing their drivers for big miles, this might be one of the things they kind of turn away from and don't look at. The biggest area where we find cheating on Elogs is in the use of personal conveyance, or PC. Now, most drivers know what that is. It's when the driver's allowed to kind of disconnect, so to speak, from the trailer, run on a personal errand, and not count against your driving hours for the day. There's some rules that are, in play there, and it basically says you can't advance your load. When you drive on PC, it's meant to be a personal errand, go grab a bite to eat, medical attention, something like that. But what are drivers doing? Well, they run out their hours for the day, and then they switch the computer or the E-log over to personal conveyance, and they continue to drive. It'll show up. And again, if you're working for a smaller carrier, they may be turning a blind eye to this, or they may not be catching that this is happening and that you're abusing it. One of the other ways drivers kind of game the system is through the use of a ghost driver, or a person that's not physically in the truck with them. But they may be able to, if they've got another driver's name, driver's license number, something like that, they may be able to enter that driver's name in the E-log like they're the second seat driver. And then you simply log out yourself, you log in the other ghost driver, and you continue to drive for the day. Again, some of the smaller companies might be behind some of this or allow this to happen. I haven't seen it in our company happen, anything like that. Nobody's been bold enough to try it, but it certainly does happen, and it's suggestion that 16% of the people polled out there said they have tried this before. And one of the last ways that drivers try to cheat the system on E-logs is by shortening their duty hours. So this one I would have thought probably would have been the most used, but it wasn't. It said only 22% of the drivers had done it. But from back in my day of running paper logs, that was one of the things, unfortunately, that I was taught at the time was, when you go into a shipper and you're sitting there for 6 hours, you don't want to show that as on-duty time. You're certainly going to shorten that up to maybe 30 minutes on-duty time while they're physically loading or unloading you. You can still do that on E-logs. You can certainly, while you're on duty and maybe you're in the dock and you should be on duty, some drivers may not choose to show that. They may show 30 minutes on duty, then maybe show themselves jumping off duty or back in the sleeper or something like that. And the last taboo subject that I want to touch on is just really a discussion about driver turnover. This is always an interesting one to me, because when I show up or when I attend maybe some industry conferences or events, something like that, it's one of the things that leadership always talks about. Where's your turnover? They say the industry's between 90% and 100%, depending on which section of it you're looking at. The good carriers are probably sub 50, under 50%, 40%, something like that. But how truthful are carriers being? It's one of those things when you're kind of talking to other executives or leader, you want to make your company look as good as possible. And I just have a feeling it's one of the things that maybe people aren't as truthful about as they could be. And unfortunately, if you're like that, you're not looking in the mirror. You're not looking at maybe where your problems really are if you can't be honest with yourself where your driver turnover is really at. So why do drivers really leave carriers? This is one of the toughest things that I struggle with too, because even when you have a driver come in and they give you proper notice of 2 weeks or something like that, or they're courteous enough to come in and they want to share with you, hey, I'm going to take another opportunity, or I have something's changed in my life and I'm going to be leaving the company. And a lot of times they'll tell you, it's nothing this company did. It's just circumstances within my life have changed. And I can think of a recent one that happened, and the gentleman come in and he said, I'm going to be giving you a week notice. When I get back at the end of the week, I'll be turning my truck in and stuff. And he goes, listen, at the end of the day, my wife and I had some discussions, and he made it sound like she was struggling at home as a single parent while he was out on the road. And he says, I just really need to find something more local, or I'm going to be home more often. Hey, we get it. We certainly understand that. That's one of the toughest challenges in our industry. So when drivers share that with you, you want to believe them and you want to understand that's reality. That could certainly be true. But when you find out 2 weeks later, they went down the street to another carrier because they leased a different kind of truck to them, and they're driving over the road just like they were for you, that's disappointing. That's one of the frustrating parts for me in our business, is trying to get drivers to be as honest as possible. If you want to leave my company because maybe we did do something to upset you or didn't do something right, I want to know about that. I want to hear from you so we can, look in the mirror and ask ourselves, hey, is this really an issue? Is this a bigger problem? So we can address it. So anyways, the honesty goes a long way, and certainly it goes both ways, of course, right? We need to be honest with drivers too. If there's ever a point we terminate a driver, let them go. But that's a frustrating one for me, because I want to know the real reasons why drivers are leaving our company. We want to make it better. We want to correct things if something's broken, stuff like that. But when we don't get that honesty, and then you find out down the road that this is really what happened or why they left. For me, it's pretty simple. It's if you weren't honest in the reason you left and what you were going to go do, then I'm also not going to invite you back when something doesn't work out on your end. And you go, maybe I didn't have it so bad at that carrier. I'm going to try to go back. The honesty and the trust goes a long way. But anyways, what's the real reason drivers leave? One of the top ones was pay, right? There's whether they can really go somewhere else and make more money, or it's just a perception that they can go make more money. That is one of the reasons that drivers leave. We know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, and that's certainly a challenge. And if somebody's flashing more money at you or promising you things where you can make bigger dollars, that's probably one of the number one reasons drivers jump and go try something else. Now, is it true? Did they actually make more money? Not always. Certainly there's probably opportunities out there. But most of the time, what we find out time and time again is that most trucking companies pay about the same. Most miles out there that are available within those trucking companies are about the same. So while they flash some number at you, the end result on Fridays in the bank account probably isn't going to be a lot different. The second reason drivers tend to leave is the treatment. How are they treated? Are they treated professionally? Are they treated with respect? This is a big one too. And I've seen it firsthand. I've seen companies that, don't treat drivers right. They don't treat them as people or part of the team. They're very disrespectful. At the end of the day, they don't care. They think drivers are a dime a dozen. And that's simply not the case. I hope nobody would ever leave our company for something like that. But there's a lot of companies out there, man. They're out there for themselves. They're out there to make money. And the driver's just a tool to do that. The carriers that have figured it out and brought those drivers into the inner circle of the company are also the ones that have the best retention rates. What about unmet expectations? That's probably the third biggest reason a lot of drivers leave, and that starts in the recruiting process. When you think about it, you're talking to a recruiter and they're painting this big fancy picture for you. You're going to get this great truck. You're going to make all this money. We're going to get you home all the time. You're going to have big miles. All these things, bonuses, whatever that is. And then you get your foot in the door, and typically drivers pick up on it right away. And I'm talking day one or day two of orientation, when all of a sudden that big rosy picture they painted for you, you just feel it from the way people talk to you, the way people treat you, or maybe don't talk to you, right? You don't feel welcome like the recruiter said you would. But that's a process that starts day one, the first phone call, email, text, whatever it is in the recruiting process. And then carriers that got it together, they'll make sure that whatever that recruiter is pitching, that operations group, that maintenance, and that safety group can all deliver. So that's a big one. couple of the other bigger reasons I can think of why drivers leave is maybe there's just no advancement, right? Some carriers they may bring you in as a student, company driver, and kind of have a career path for the driver where you can advance, make more money, grow into that job. But there's some carriers where you go in, you're going to be a company driver and you're paid this flat rate and that's all you're ever going to be. There's just nowhere to go. And while you can probably put up with that for, a couple years maybe, at some point you need to make more money. You need to keep growing in your career. So I can see why that'd be a big reason why somebody would check out and go find another carrier, another opportunity. And then the last one I can think of is obviously home time. What does your carrier do for home time? Are they getting you home as they promised? Are they getting you home when you asked to be home? And how do they treat that? Are they busting their tail to make sure they get you home for those important dates that you put in for? Or do they just seem like they don't care? And unfortunately, there's a lot of carriers that don't care, or they don't have a good enough process to communicate within the operations group that, hey, that driver needs to be home in 5 days, in 4 days, in 3 days. So they're not putting you on the right loads to position you to get you home when you need to be. And when they do that, sometimes they just kind of shrug their shoulders, go, gosh, I can't find you anything to get you home. But the reality is they weren't working at it hard enough. They absolutely can find loads to get you close to the house. It's just nobody was really paying attention to it. Those are just a few of the taboo topics in our industry. And if you're looking for a carrier that's not afraid to tackle these head on, check us out at chiefcarriers.com.